too. Yeah, my name is Emma. I'm 25. I'm from Austin, New York. I met Janelle at a summer camp that we were both working at, and I'm so
Welcome everybody to the James L. Parr Vintage Halloween Museum, also known as my dining room. I've been collecting for a little over 10 years, and I'm here in Framingham, and it was because of my connection to Framingham that started me on this Halloween collection. I love Halloween anyway, and when I was researching some information about this Halloween haunted trolley tour that I did, I found this unbelievable collection of Halloween decorations and booklets and invitations that the Dennison made about a quarter mile from my house. And I just got really interested in them and started collecting them. And so it's been about 10 years, and I have a pretty good collection. I've since branched out into other things besides Dennison. So I will give you a little tour and a little history at the same time.
you guys so much for coming, and thanks to everyone watching it later too. My name is Emma. I'm 25. I'm from Austining, New York. I met Janelle at a summer camp that we were both working at, and I'm so
Welcome everybody to the James L. Parr Vintage Halloween Museum, also known as my dining room. I've been collecting for a little over 10 years, and I'm here in Framingham, and it was because of my connection to Framingham that started me on this Halloween collection. I love Halloween anyway, and when I was researching some information about this Halloween haunted trolley tour that I did, I found this unbelievable collection of Halloween decorations and booklets and invitations that the Dennison made about a quarter mile from my house. And I just got really interested in them and started collecting them. And so it's been about 10 years, and I have a pretty good collection. I've since branched out into other things besides Dennison. So I will give you a little tour and a little history at the same time.
for coming, and thanks to everyone watching it later too. My name is Emma. I'm 25. I'm from Austining, New York. I met Janelle at a summer camp that we were both working at, and I'm so
Welcome everybody to the James L. Parr Vintage Halloween Museum, also known as my dining room. I've been collecting for a little over 10 years, and I'm here in Framingham, and it was because of my connection to Framingham that started me on this Halloween collection. I love Halloween anyway, and when I was researching some information about this Halloween haunted trolley tour that I did, I found this unbelievable collection of Halloween decorations and booklets and invitations that the Dennison made about a quarter mile from my house. And I just got really interested in them and started collecting them. And so it's been about 10 years, and I have a pretty good collection. I've since branched out into other things besides Dennison. So I will give you a little tour and a little history at the same time.
you guys so much for coming, and thanks to everyone watching it later too. My name is Emma. I'm 25. I'm from Ossining, New York. I met Janelle at a summer camp that we were both working at, and I'm so
Welcome everybody to the James L. Parr Vintage Halloween Museum, also known as my dining room. I've been collecting for a little over 10 years, and I'm here in Framingham, and it was because of my connection to Framingham that started me on this Halloween collection. I love Halloween anyway, and when I was researching some information about this Halloween haunted trolley tour that I did, I found this unbelievable collection of Halloween decorations and booklets and invitations that the Dennison made about a quarter mile from my house. And I just got really interested in them and started collecting them. And so it's been about 10 years, and I have a pretty good collection. I've since branched out into other things besides Dennison. So I will give you a little tour and a little history at the same time.
Right, everybody's coming in. Welcome, everybody. Thank you so much for being here tonight. While we have everybody joining us from the waiting room, I'll let you know that I am Janelle Codiani. I am the Executive Director of ātac in Framingham, and we are a visual and performing arts center in downtown. If you are unfamiliar with us, or if you've just been living that pandemic life and you want to know what we're up to coming up, I suggest that you check out our website. It's www.ātac160.org. And that'll show you for the rest of the virtual programs we have coming up for the rest of the season. Our typical season ends in June, and this summer we have some live summer programming, particularly our outdoor movie festival, movie series, Reels, Meals, and Automobiles. And we are showing 4 family-friendly nostalgic films. I highly recommend you check that out. It's something like a drive-in, but we're not allowed to use the word drive-in because of the kind of copyright we have. So please check that out. Check out everything that we have coming up. Get on our mailing list so you can find out what happens in September. And thank you so much for being here. I'm just going to let you know a couple of things. Here we all are in the Zoom. We're an audience, and you have the option to keep your video on or off. I understand that after a year and a half of this, everybody might be a bit zoomed out, but it can be very nice for the tellers to see your smiling faces. If you are interested in only seeing the teller yourself, then you can toggle your view to speaker view. And also the teller will be spotlit as well. So if you want to just only hear the person talking and performing, you can put on speaker view. If you want to see everybody in the show and feel like you're in a little room together, you can keep it on gallery view. Please feel free to put comments in the chat about how much you are enjoying the time in the shows. And I'm so excited you're here. Thank you for spending this Saturday evening with us. And with that, I'm going to pass it off to Marianne.
Welcome again, everybody. I'll say good evening, afternoon, or good morning to you wherever you are. As Janelle just said, we're all in a different place and we're all here together. Welcome to Utter Hope. I'm Marianne Christie Burnside, and this show is made possible with a wonderful partnership with Janelle and ātac and her staff, including Dave, who's behind the scenes helping us out tonight. And I also want to thank the Metro West Regional Coalition for Suicide Prevention for their generous support of our partnership. Because of them, I get to host 4 wonderful storytellers tonight and all of you. But before I get to that, let me just say a few words about hope. Hope is sometimes viewed as wishful thinking or conflated with that. I used to think about it like that too in my life. I think it's stronger than that. I like what Aristotle said. Hope is a waking dream. Hope enlivens, this is me again, not Aristotle. Hope enlivens our dreams of what could be. I think it broadens our perspective on what's possible. And so that makes space in our hearts and minds and fuels our sense of agency, our creativity, and our joy. It helps us live into our dreams of what could be. And it also helps us remember that we don't know everything. We sometimes think we do, but that's just a thought, and it's not true. We don't know everything, trust me. Sometimes we can experience hope like being struck by lightning in a thunderstorm, a sudden flash of insight that's been taking shape silently and invisibly, and now it's unmistakably here. And sometimes hope comes to us in softer, slower ways, like when you're outside and a light rain begins and you feel one drop and another, and you still ask yourself, is it raining? So hope is so important because without it, our lives can dry up and shrivel up right in front of us. Here's what a few others have said about hope. Helen Keller said, "Nothing can be done without hope and confidence." Martin Luther King Jr. said, "We must accept finite disappointment, but never lose infinite hope." Charles Dickens said, "It's always something to know you've done the most you could, but don't leave off hoping, or it's of no use doing anything. Hope to the last." Desmond Tutu said, "Hope is being able to see that there's light despite all of the darkness." And Charles M. Schultz of the Peanuts fame said, "A whole stack of memories never equal one little hope." So hope presents itself to us in unique ways, and our views and our sense of hope are shaped by our own life experiences. Tonight, you'll see and hear 4 amazing storytellers: Alison Musiela, Teresa Okokon, Brendan Schneider, and Anna Willis Collier. And we can all do this for our Zoom applause. You'll come to know something about these good people and about hope through their stories. All the stories are true. Our first teller is Alison Musiela. Alison is a mom of 4, a film and commercial actor, a writer, and a nonprofit strategist and advocate in the areas of autism, sustainability, and racial equity. A fan of comedy, Alison co-created and writes a local news show in the spirit of SNL. At the same time, she also serves on her town's school committee and is committed to making environmental and social change within her suburban town. Alison loves a good story, especially those that truly touch the heart. Originally from Minnesota and Wyoming, Alison has made her home in Massachusetts for the last 22 years and has learned to love driving in rotaries. I still haven't learned that. When I asked Alison to name a song that inspires hope in her, she came right back with Rome by the B-52s. So tuning in from Metro West Boston tonight, here she is to say more. Welcome, Alison.
Thank you. So Tall Boy, as he was known and is known affectionately in our family, his real name is Lucas. He was nervous, like anyone would be on their way to get their 4 wisdom teeth extracted. Now, the poor kid has had his share of dental issues. He's had the braces, the retainers, even implants for 2 teeth that had no replacements. But by now, at age 20, Tall Boy has a marvelous smile that he shares freely when he's not hyper-focused on his sports statistics or reading 538.com. He is my firstborn, unique from day one, a serious, brilliant old soul with a heart of gold that is pure and honest as you'll ever find. He measures in at 6'4", and he carries himself like the long distance runner that he is. He's light on his feet, he's focused, he's determined. And that's how he walked into the endodontist's office. The first nurse took a look at him and laughed. "I'm not sure you're going to fit on the table," she said. I fake laughed, aware of the fact that nearly everyone Lucas meets comments on his height. I always want to say he is so much more than that. Minutes later, I sit with him in the procedure room as the doctor is giving the required post-op instructions. I could start to see the telltale signs of anxiety, the shifting of the weight, the nail biting, his searching eyes. His normally quiet, calm nature has switched to something more vocal and concerned, but mature, as he learned over time to self-advocate. "Remind me again," he said, "how long will it be until I can run? And core, how long until I can do my core exercises?" "He's been running 10 miles a day," I said proudly, "training for his college team." I tried to wipe the proud smile off my face and just feel the awe of seeing who this kid has become. He has changed in front of my eyes. And I yearn to still feel responsible for some of his successes, but truly they are all his own. The nurses were right. The tables are narrow and short, and this is so that the medical team can access all sides of the patient at all times. So tall boy's arms and feet dangled off the sides of the bed, but true to form, he never complained, just smiled. Soon they began to read his vital signs, somewhat confused as he kept setting off the alarm. I knew enough not to panic, but it turns out he was in such good shape that his heartbeat stayed too low, between 45 and 55 beats a minute, slow and steady, just as he runs. It made me think of his heart rate in utero the first time I heard it, around 145 beats per minute. That number had astounded me. After taking tall boy's vitals, they started him on oxygen with a Darth Vader type of mask. He flinched. He's never liked having things on his face or on his skin. He breathed through it, let them put it on. Then the nurse asked, "Do you want your mom here while we start the drugs to make you sleepy?" "Yes," he said as he glanced to me. And eye contact from Lucas is a gift, as are the words that came next. "Mom, will you hold my hand?" "Of course," I said. His huge, cold hands dwarfed mine, which happened to be warm for once. And while he dealt with his nerves, I provided some comic relief because that's what I do for myself, as much as for anyone. I offered to put his cold hands on my stomach like you would do when stranded in the tundra of Minnesota, but that actually seemed really weird. I talked too much. I suggested that he choose different music to help him relax. I helped the nurse adjust the height of the table with one of the buttons on the ground until I mistakenly stepped on it and made him dive down just seconds after his IV had been placed. And then I tripped over the cord of his oxygen mask, ripping it off of his face, even causing the nurse to laugh. "Nice, Mom," he said. "Way to go." And then he was quiet. I looked down on him as I stood there, like you would during an out-of-body experience. I saw his chewed nails, his thick, coarse blonde hair, the running watch that never left his wrist. His eyes stared at the ceiling, where an ocean scene was painted on the tiles to distract the patients. "Luke, you doing okay? What are you doing?" "Just counting things," he said. Of course he was. This is how he'd calmed himself for his entire life, with numbers. At this point, they asked me to step out, but I first grabbed the nurse's attention. Just one more thing, I said. He's on the spectrum. He might get a little more nervous on the recovery side. I wanted you to know. No problem, she said. We've seen it all. Thanks for letting me know. I had the next 15 minutes to reflect on this rite of passage. I thought of how many mistakes I'd made as a mom, as well as the things I was doing right. I remembered how the best advice I'd ever gotten was to really listen to your kid, whether it's answering a 1:30 a.m. text from college or holding one's hand on a too small hospital bed. And I thought of how I probably didn't need to mention his autism anymore, how it was his news, as my mom would say, to share, but how I fell back on it as a habit from years of being in mama bear mode, of seeing him struggle and wanting to explain his magical essence to those who thought they knew him. And I thought of how this gentle giant is now so completely separate from me in so many ways, and yet how our mother-son bond is so pure, as it was on the hospital bed where we first met and where I first reached for his tiny hand. And it was proof that despite my many mistakes as a mom, he still needs me in the simplest way, and that I am truly part of his heart. The door opened, and the sight was the comical one that many of you have seen before and forced yourself to witness without laughing. Tall boy was sitting up, gauze stuffed in his mouth, bandages tied like bunny ears, humming to La La Land with the doctor. He was as uninhibited as I'd ever seen him. The doctor said he did great and that he'd sung with her through much of the procedure. I told him, Luke, this is like the closest I will ever see you to being drunk. He was incredibly risk averse, still is, had never broken a rule, and had promised he would never, ever drink. Tall boy responded, I'd really like to try that at college sometime. In fact, I reserve the right to do so. I couldn't help but hope that he'd remember that statement someday. As the nurse and I stifled giggles, he air drove himself like a race car driver from his wheelchair as he got pushed out of the building. He made Formula One noises and asked where the pit stop was. And then I helped him awkwardly into the car and thanked the nurse for all she'd done. We both glanced towards the van as we heard the window going down. Thank you for everything. Thank you, he said cheerily and waved very enthusiastically for having just had 4 teeth pulled. And I realized at that point that he was well on his way, that I'd done a few things right. I taught him to say thank you. I taught him to think of others, to smile even when it was hard, to go the extra mile. And now that I saw that he could do all of this, and under the influence, I might add, I could finally take a breath and let go a little and bask in the feeling of hope, just as he did when he came into the world and into my arms. But he's still mine, and my heart, always tied to his, couldn't be more proud. Thank you.
That's so heartfelt.
Thank you, Allison.
That was great.
Beautiful story. Thank you for that beautiful story. Our next teller tonight is Teresa Okokan. Teresa is a Wisconsinite living in New England, a writer, a storyteller, the co-host of Stories from the Stage, and a 2020 VONA alum. In addition to writing and performing her own stories, Teresa also teaches storytelling and writing workshops and classes, coaches other tellers, hosts story slams, and frequently MCs events for nonprofit. An alum of both the Memoir Incubator and Essay Incubator programs at Grub Street, and she's working on a memoir of essays about memory, family stories, and the death of her father. Here's Teresa with a story to share.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for having me this evening. I think I can pretty confidently say that there's only one time in my life where I actively, like wholeheartedly decided where I was going to live. And that was in 2010 when I made the decision to move to Boston. Before that, you know, as a kid, of course, I lived where my parents said that we were going to live. And then I joined the Peace Corps, and I lived in Guayaquil in Ecuador. And I joined the Peace Corps still during the time where volunteers had no say over where we were going to live. We lived where Peace Corps said we were going to live. And so that's where I went. When I returned from Peace Corps, I moved to Chicago, which is almost a conscious decision, except I applied for jobs in the Twin Cities, Milwaukee, other places around Wisconsin and in Chicago, because that's just sort of like where my family is and where my home base is. I moved to Chicago because that's the first job I got was in Chicago. And so I moved to where the job was. And then I was in Chicago for a year. I was working in a program where I was hired for like a position that was going to last for 1 year. And that year started to come to an end, and I just didn't love living in Chicago, and I really didn't want to be there. And my heart was telling me to move to Boston. So I looked for jobs in Boston. I got a job in Boston, and then I packed up my car and my mom's car, and we drove halfway across the country, and I moved to Boston. And for the first 2 years I was there, I lived in Newton, which is a suburb of Boston. And then after 2 years, I moved to Rosendale, which is one of the southern neighborhoods in Boston. And the first 2 years I was there in Rosendale, I lived on a street called Wellsmere. I lived near this cafe, or not a cafe, it's like an Irish bar. Cafe is a fancy way of saying it. I lived near an Irish bar called like J.J. Branley's or Brunelli's or something like that. And I would walk down the street and get a burger for dinner or whatever. And I just really loved living there. But that apartment was a little bit strange. I mean, I was living by myself. I didn't have any roommates, but I technically was living in a therapy office. And so mostly I was by myself, except for the therapy patients, but that's another story for another time. After that, I moved to Manning Street, which is near the Stop and Shop in Rosendale, if you're familiar with Rosie. And that house on Manning Street became my home. And I was there for 6 years. I was the third of 3 roommates to move into that house, but after, you know, living there for so many years, I just sort of became the most senior roommate living in the house, and I cycled through any number of really, really, really bad roommates, and then in the end, I had 2 really wonderful roommates. And that's where I was living on Manning Street when the COVID-19 pandemic hit the United States. In March of 2020. And I don't know if any of you were living with roommates during the pandemic, but it wasn't totally complicated, but it was definitely complicated. You know, living with roommates is living with other people. It's like closeness without any actual intimacy. And it just became more and more difficult sort of to navigate. And one of my roommates decided that they were going to move out. And so then my other roommate and I were in a position that we needed to either find a third roommate to move in or find a 2-bedroom somewhere where the 2 of us could move. And I was pretty committed to staying in Rosendale. Now, again, I don't know if any of you looked for housing during the pandemic. This was like summer of 2020. We interviewed dozens of roommates, of potential roommates. There were plenty of like teachers actually that applied to live in our 3rd bedroom. And many of them didn't know if they would have a job come September. And my landlord was like, no, I'm not willing to rent to them. And on top of all of that, my landlord was raising the rent, and I could afford the increase in rent, but I kind of didn't want to, because, you know, when your landlord increases the rent, it's not like you get anything extra for the extra money that you're paying. Like, you're just going to live in the same place and pay more money. And so eventually we just weren't finding anything, and we decided to look separately, and I ended up looking in Providence, Rhode Island, because I liked Provi. Like my brother, in the whole time that I was living in Boston, almost that entire time he was living in Providence. He went to RISD, and then he lived here for several years after he graduated. And I knew Providence, like as the way that a big sister knows Providence, which is like, I know the cute places to go because that's where my brother would take me. You know, I was like, there's cute vintage stores here. I go to them on a regular basis. There's cute restaurants. There's like somewhere there's outdoor bocce ball near like a wine bar or something. And I was like, it's cute. I like it there. I'm gonna move. And I had a good handful of friends, primarily from the storytelling community, actually, who had moved out to Providence. And so I was like, I'm gonna make the move. I'm gonna move to Providence. So I moved here in the fall of 2020, which always feels weird to say. Like it feels like the fall of an empire, but I just mean like the autumn of 2020. And I moved into this amazing apartment. I'm here now. I'm in my kitchen. It has like turquoise walls and like a black and white checkered floor. It has floor to ceiling built in, where I display and store all of my like antique glassware. I keep a full bar at my house. I filled this apartment with like my sort of like mid-century modern kind of vibe. It's super colorful. I like to call it like Higgy, but make it black, because there's just like tons of African prints all over the place. And it's just a really colorful place. And I'm really lucky. There's exposed brick. I mean, this place is gorgeous. There's laundry in unit. It's great. And I was like making this my home, you know, I was doing my best to make this my home. And there came a weekend in November of 2020, after I'd been here for a couple of months, where I just didn't get off of the couch. And I spent most of that weekend just watching The Masked Singer, like old episodes of The Masked Singer on Hulu, and ordering DoorDash, and really only getting up to like use the bathroom, eat, go to bed, come back to the couch. And I wasn't like sick. I didn't have a virus. I thank God didn't have COVID or anything like that. I was just like sick in the way that I sort of like baseline always am in my head. And yeah, I got through that weekend. I got through Thanksgiving, which is normally my favorite holiday, but was super difficult, obviously, in 2020. Sometime right after the holiday, right after Thanksgiving, I went to a plant store, and I like got like 4 new house plants, you know, and I was just like needed things to keep alive in addition to trying to keep myself alive. And a lot of people got into houseplants during the pandemic, and I think that it's for that same reason, like, you know, wanting to like care for something outside of yourself. And then like probably 3 out of 4 of the new houseplants that I got died, and that wasn't a great feeling. But like plants die, like that happens. But yeah, it just was becoming more and more difficult to actively convince myself that I was okay. And what I started to realize is that when I left Rosendale, I wasn't just leaving a house, like that house on Manning Street, and I wasn't just leaving even my home on Manning Street. I was also leaving my community. You know, Rosendale was a place where I went to abutters meetings at the community center. I volunteered. I was like active in our gifting community. I went to the farmer's market. There was a day that I was like once standing on my porch and someone drove by and said, "Hola, vecina," and I had no idea who it was. Like it could have been any number of people. I asked 2 people and it wasn't either of them. I couldn't go to the grocery store or the post office without seeing somebody that I knew. It was my community, and I left it. And now I was trying to make a home during the pandemic in a new city. And it wasn't working. It just like wasn't going great. So I have this friend back home in Green Bay, Wisconsin, which is where I went to college, and she really likes senior dogs. And she's adopted 2 senior dogs from this shelter in Wisconsin. And anytime that the shelter posts a dog, you know, she'll repost it and she's like, look at this dog, he's so cute, and somebody has to adopt this dog. And, you know, I just think senior dogs are adorable because they look like delighted and super sad at the same time. And that just like really fits my aesthetic, you know, when I'm just like, they're so cute and they're graying and their tongues hang out and all, you know, they just like do like an old lady trot when they walk around. They're just adorable. And so I'm looking at these dogs kind of the way that I would look at like, you know, Redfin and Zillow, that's just like, you know, lustfully looking at this thing that I'm like, I can't afford this home, but I just look at them all the time. And I started to think to myself, like, I could get a dog. Like, I can do this. Like, maybe I can get one of these senior dogs, you know? So I sent a text to my landlord, and the text said like something like, what are your rules about pets? In parentheses, she whispered. And I'm very lucky that my landlord is the life partner of one of my best friends. And so after first responding that, like, you know, he was okay with fish and hamsters, and then increasing it to, okay, he's okay with cats, then I was like, I want a dog. And he was like, okay, let's talk about it. And I like prepped myself for this conversation. Like, I called my mom in Wisconsin and I was like, I need to convince my landlord that a 10-pound or like a 10-year-old under 20-pound senior dog is the same thing as like a fat cat. Like, what's the difference? Except that it's like not gonna scratch things, hopefully, you know? But I didn't even have to convince him, because luckily once we had the conversation, he was ready and it was a yes. And I immediately went online and filled out applications for several dogs. Filling out applications for dogs felt a lot like online dating, in that, you know, you like reach out to all these different dogs and you're like, I really like you, I think you're cute. And then like, you know, I think I filled out 6 applications and like only 1 responded. It was a lot like online dating, that I'm like, I just think all of you are cute and none of you are into me, but that's fine. The only dog that responded, the dog didn't respond, but the only dog who I got a response for was this dog named Minnie. And she was 10 years old, or at least estimated to be 10 years old. She was in Arkansas. She was the saddest looking dog on any of these websites. Like, every photo of her, she just looked like, that was like the vibe that she was giving. She looked like Eeyore, kind of. And like the shelter was like, she doesn't bark, you know, she pretty much just sleeps all day. But she was at a shelter where the website was like, you know, you have to act fast on these dogs because dogs at this shelter don't last long, which is just a nice way of saying that this is a kill shelter. And if nobody wants to adopt this dog, we're going to have to put her down. And Minnie had been in the shelter for a couple of weeks and nobody wanted her. You know, she's 10. She had a huge tumor, like a golf ball sized tumor that had to be removed because she'd never been neutered. And so she developed this mammary tumor and they removed that. But, you know, they weren't really sure if she was house trained. She wasn't playful. She's super quiet. She's just going to sleep pretty much all the time, just going to hang out, take naps. So she's not the most desirable dog for most people, but she was chef's kiss, exactly what I was looking for. So, yeah, so I started communicating back and forth with this shelter in Arkansas, and I sent them some money on PayPal, and then sent them some more money on PayPal to pay for the transportation, and, you know, scheduled a day in late January where I was going to drive to a gas station parking lot in Connecticut and get a dog. Because that's how it works. They just go to this gas station in Connecticut, this gigantic trailer pulls up, and there's like 50 people that go and line up with leashes and blankets and crates to get their dogs and their cats off of this gigantic trailer. Because in Rhode Island, if you adopt a dog during the pandemic, the dog has to quarantine for 2 weeks. And so to get around that rule, like, they just bring the dogs to Connecticut instead. So yeah, I was last in line because I'm super patient, and also because it was January 30th and it was really, really cold. And I was like not trying to wait in this super long line for hours. I waited until everyone else was done, and I walked up to this trailer and I said, I'm here for Minnie. And they bring out this like pile of a dog, and she's tricolored and tiny, and she has these like 2 big ears that are just poking up at all times. And they were like, oh, Minnie is such a sweetheart. We hope you enjoy her. And they put this dog in my arms, and I brought her back to my car, and it was like immediately my life changed, you know, like immediately my life became this like beautiful life that I was like sort of pretending to live before her, and now was actually living. And now it wasn't just me trying to keep myself alive and keep myself going, or keep myself and my houseplants alive and keep us going. It was like me trying to stay alive with this dog and like keep this dog alive. And yeah, it seems really silly to say, but she really gives me like a reason to get out of bed a lot of days, like this morning included. So yeah, it's been a couple of months now, and I have this pup, and she lives with me, and I love her, and she doesn't have a choice, so I'm pretty sure she loves me back, and it's going well. And while I'm not sure that Providence really feels like home yet, this dog feels like home to me. Thank you.
Thank you, Teresa. Thank you for that beautiful story. Our next teller is Brendan Schneider, who is tuning in tonight from the greater Boston area. Brendan has been a professional story spinner for 13 years and has performed all over New England at venues like the WGBH Studios, the Cutler Majestic Theater, Club Passim, and the Life is Good corporate headquarters. He's performed with storytelling groups, including the Northeast Storytelling, also Fugitive Productions, and The Moth, where he was a Grand Slam finalist, and Mass Mouth, where he's won multiple semifinal story slams. Also appearances on WGBH and the World Channel Stories from the Stage series. By day, Brendan is a career advisor and webinar instructor, helping job seekers find professional matches, and he frequently uses the principles of storytelling while advising job seekers. Let's welcome Brendan and his story.
Hey, how are you? So our son, Dean, was due in 3 weeks. The problem was he was breech. So instead of being head down like a normal baby, he was upright. Now, Kelly, my wife, her doctor kept saying that Dean would right himself, but now she was saying that Kelly would have to have a C-section. Unless. I found out that there was this procedure called version, where you turn the baby. And I remember being so confused. I mean, you can turn a baby from the outside? Now, it was risky. It could tear the placenta, and it could alter Dean's heart rate or Kelly's heart rate, and it could cause preterm labor. But still, Kelly didn't want a C-section. I totally get it, and we decided to go for it. So we walk into the hospital, right? And the hospital that day was it was too bright, you know. It was too cold, that unmistakable hospital cold. And I started getting really nervous when they brought out all this paperwork. It's like a stack of paperwork and all these forms exonerating the hospital if like anything went wrong. And I remember seeing my hand like actually shake as I signed off on this stuff. And that's when I started to think maybe this wasn't a good idea. Like maybe something was really going to go wrong. Well, Kelly disappears with a nurse to go put on one of those gowns that, you know, never fit around all the way. And right there in the exam room alone, I got down on my knees and I said, please, God, he's just a little baby and he's counting on us to do the right thing. And we haven't even met him yet. And we really have no idea what we're doing. So please guide us. Now, Kelly comes back in to the room now with a whole team of doctors and nurses, and they say that there's a colleague of theirs who with our permission, would like to assist in the version. And we were cool with that. And I said, hi, I'm Brendan. And he said, hello, I'm Moses. And they said, Moses, well, welcome. Lead the way. And I thought, that's fast service. So they get Kelly up on a table, and they got doctors on all sides of her, and they put the jelly onto her baby belly mountain, and they fire up the ultrasound machine. You can see Dean's little head on the screen there. They give her a shot, and everyone puts their hands on Kelly's stomach, and Moses gives me this nod, and they push from different angles into Kelly's stomach. And I'm watching this, and all I can think of is the giant foam puzzle pieces that toddlers play with. And the coordination of this team, it was remarkable. I've never seen anything like it before. And everyone sounds like an air traffic controller. Okay, go for 30 degrees. We click clear for 30 degrees, go for 30 degrees, go for 60 degrees, baby's heart rate steady, 90 degrees. And they're turning our son. And you can see the outline of a knuckle, then the outline of a heel, then a shoulder, and they're turning him. They physically turn like he's a living turnstile or a maypole. I've never seen anything like it before, ever, and not since. And then Kelly's breathing gets heavy, and I say, Kelly, you're all right. And she says, yes, it's just a lot of pressure. And she says, my lips are numb. And one of the doctors yells out and says, well, that's just a side effect of the Tiberlatine. Go for 90 degrees. Go for 90 degrees up. Yep, we're at 100 degrees, 100 degrees, go for 110 degrees, 110 degrees up. Baby's heart rate increasing, baby's heart rate increasing now. And Kelly's eyes start to flutter. I'm like, Kelly, you're right, you're right. She's, yeah, it's a lot of pressure. And I said, do you want them to stop? And she shakes her head, no. So they start in again. Okay, 130 degrees, 135, 145. Yeah, we're at 145. Baby's heart rate steady, baby's heart rate steady, 150, you are at 150, and we're at 180. Baby's heart, baby fully turned. 190. 220 degrees, and one of the doctors on the ultrasound yells out, he's completing the circle. So I want to pause here for a second, because it's rare that version works. I mean, think of all that paperwork before. But even more rare that the baby then turns himself the rest of the way around back to where we started from again. So 360 degrees. And the doctors tell us that if we want to do it again, there's going to be even more risk of trauma for the baby and for mom. But Moses, he's right there, and he gives me this nod. But we all turn to Kelly, and Kelly nods. So they're turning our son again, and all I can do is watch. By 30 degrees, 60 degrees, 90 degrees, 100 degrees. We're at 110. You're at 110 degrees, 120 degrees. We're at 130 degrees. We're back to 110 degrees. We're at 100 degrees. Now we're at 135 degrees, 140, 145. We're clear for 145, 150. We're clear for 150. Go for 160, 180. Baby fully turned. Baby's heart rate steady. And that was it. Dean was upside down, and he stayed that way. Now, in my mind, I will forever be grateful of that team. And my wife, Kelly, what a warrior, right? She's like the real hero of this story. 11 days later, we had a little boy. And to that visiting soul who decided to help us out, thank you, Moses. And thank all of you. Thanks a lot.
Wow, Brendan, thank you for that story. Round of applause. I'm about to introduce our final storyteller of the evening. Anna Willis Collier is the co-founder and director at Tell and Act, where she works with clients to identify how to harness the power of storytelling to transform business, community, and personal life. Anna works with a diverse array of clients, including the BBC News in London, and as a storyteller has been featured on The Moth, on Suitcase Stories, and Mass Mouth stages. She's produced numerous storytelling shows, and especially enjoys identifying and coaching storytellers for national TV show Stories from the Stage. Anna is also a passionate advocate of empowering and giving voice to those who are otherwise unheard through the power of storytelling. Here's Anna.
Thank you, Mary. So I have done many jobs in my life. I have been a chef, I've waited tables, I have picked avocados, harvested potatoes. That was one of my least favorite. I have designed, developed, and launched multiple $1 million worth of product ranges. I have worked in India with an aid agency, and I have been a professional Bollywood dancer, sort of. But about 7 years ago now, I'd kind of reached an all-time low. My job at the time was to stand on street corners, one particular street corner, and I would try and get noticed, and every now and again I would stop the odd car or a truck. My job was a school crossing guard. Now, I'm not saying this was a low moment because a school crossing guard is a lowly job, because it is not. It's a very good, honest job. But it was more me. You see, I really wasn't very well at the time. I was suffering from different health issues and mental health issues. It was exacerbated by the fact that I just moved from the other side of the planet, from Singapore, with my husband and 2 kids. And I had loved living there. We had an amazing, tight community of friends and all of those wonderful people in our community that makes it that community. And I was a fish out of water. I felt like somebody had just grabbed me out of the water and chucked me onto a big pile of sand. And I was flopping around helplessly, lost, lonely, isolated. And when this job came up, basically the school crossing guard that crossed us over the street every day, this big, busy street, she retired. And I said to her boss, this policeman that lives down our street, I'm like, Ricky, when are you going to get us another crossing guard? Because, yeah, I can cross the street, but I worry for the kids. And he's like, yeah, why don't you do it? And I was like, now, you see, at the time, I was suffering from really acute and chronic depression. I could barely get out of bed. I was leading kind of like a false life, or a lie, because every morning I would get up and go and get the kids up and get them sorted and get them to school. And the minute I got home, I would collapse, dive into bed, set my alarm quickly for the time that to get up and go get them again, and then sleep, a heavy sleep. I remember being so tired that I dreamt of being tired while I was asleep. But the alarm would go off and I would get up and I'd rush and get the kids, and I was fine. And I put on a happy face and everything was cool. But I thought that if I took this job, that I'd be out of bed for a little bit longer, for that hour, half hour in the morning, and half hour on, the school, the return run. And so I accepted the job. And I also thought that, I would cross people. I would help people cross the street and I would talk to them. And it would be nice because I felt so isolated and lonely. And we'd have a little chat and it would be nice. And some people were like, hey, Anna. And it would be nice, maybe a little chat. They'd go on their way. And other people would they'd carry on their phone or their meeting, and they'd walk straight past me and not even acknowledge my presence. And that felt pretty shit, actually. But it kind of helped, but not really. And I continued to get worse. I continued to get quite a lot worse, to the point where I felt like I was wading through quick, drying concrete whilst trying to knit fog at the same time. I couldn't think straight. I'd go to the post office to post a bunch of stuff, only I'd get to the end of the queue and not actually have the stuff with me. And I felt like I was going crazy. I would put sunglasses on in the mornings to go to my crossing guards spot just around the corner from where I lived, to hide the fact that I had tears in my eyes and I was trying not to stop. And then one afternoon, afternoon, I got to my spot and there was a big black truck and it pulled up right next to the crossing and it had blue flashing lights and it was a police truck. It was my boss. And he got out the truck, and he walked round and he had like a face of thunder. And I was like, are you all right? What's wrong? And he was like, and I said, and I looked and there was a whole bunch of people coming and they needed to cross. I was like, hang on a minute. Is it all right if I just cross them? And he said, yeah, okay, go on. So I was thinking, is he being a bit dramatic with this blue light? Anyway, so I crossed these people and they go, and I'm like, what? And he's like, where were you yesterday, this time yesterday? And I said, I honestly couldn't remember because like never did anything. Life wasn't that exciting. There wasn't a lot of memorable shit happening. And I said, well, it was this time yesterday, I'd have been here. And he said, you weren't here. And I went, but I would have been here. And he said, no, I drove past, turned around, came back, and I stopped, and you weren't here. And I had to cover your shift for you. Where were you? And he looked so angry with me. And I'm like, so all I can think, still don't know. I must have just not woken up to my alarm or not set my alarm. And I still don't know. But I felt terrible. I felt terribly, hideously guilty that somehow I'd conned them and not turned up and been paid for something I hadn't done. And then the kids, like, oh my God, they would have had to have maybe if he hadn't have showed up, they would have had to have crossed by themselves, and what would have happened. And I'm a calamity and I'm a failure and I think I'm going mad. And I finished my shift and I went home and I called my husband and I said, you have to come home, I need to speak to you. And he came home and I confessed and I lost it and I sobbed and he went, I'm going mad, I don't know what's wrong with me and I need some help. And he's like, yeah, we need to get you some help. And I'm like, yeah, well, I need some help. And so that afternoon, we actually called the doctor, we tried to get a therapist, we tried to line up all this stuff, and I felt like marginally better, but I was so tired and I couldn't wait to go back to sleep. And the next morning, I walk around the corner from my house, and there's two people walking towards me, and one is a young man, and he has his hand out like this, like a high five gesture. And I went, oh, because I hadn't expected to see people walking towards me. And then I went, oh, and gave him a high five back. I reciprocated, and he had this big smile on his face. And it was like he could see behind my sunglasses and see into me, my sad heart, and shine a ray of sunshine on my heart. And I felt warmed by this. And I was like, oh, I had a bit of a flutter, not from an amorously flirty kind of way, because he's probably less than or more than half my age, but just because he had shone some heightened warmth into my heart. And I finished my shift and I couldn't stop thinking about it all the day. But I felt kind of buoyed by this weird gesture. And I found some more help. I got a couple of appointments and I did go back to bed and I did sleep, but less so. And it was tough. I got my appointments. I found out that I had a couple of underlying health issues, which were actually, luckily, fixable, manageable over time, and so I could get better over time. But as the weeks went on, I started to see this guy more and more. I'd come around the corner and maybe he'd be a bit further down and he'd go, and I'd give him a high five. And for the rest of that day, it would lift me up. It didn't fix me, but it just made me feel better. And then one day he stopped and he said, what's your name? So I introduced myself and he said his name was CB. And he said, I really like seeing you. You just seem such a lovely person. He'd never spoken to me and he wasn't chatting me up. And I was like, you do. I am so grateful for you because I don't know what you do, but you are magic. And he looked happy. And he carried on going past. He carried on going. And then I heard this sort of rhythmic kind of sound. And I looked behind me and he was skipping. He was skipping down the street. And I'm like, and just made me feel so lovely. Like, not only had he sort of made me feel happier with this strange small interaction, but somehow I had imparted a sense of happiness within him. Go figure. And then one day I'm stood there drenched in fluorescent yellow, very sexy, big long yellow jacket, stop sign on a stick, in the middle of the street, traffic stop both ways, people crossing. And I see him run up the street, run into the middle of the street, give me a high five, and carry on going, go back and carry on going. And another time I'm on the other side of the street and he's walking down the street and he's with a young lady, and he stops and he takes off his backpack and he gives it to this young lady, and he goes like this to me, like wait, watch me. And then he takes a little run up and he does a cartwheel. And after his cartwheel, he goes, and I go, I love you, from the other side of the street. And he goes, mwah, mwah, like this, and I kisses back. And this kind of went on for, I don't know, on and off for a few months. And as the meds started kicking in and I started feeling better and more able and happier, that his medicine that I guess he exuded also brought the sun up and put more rays of sun into my heart and warmed my heart. And one day I was at the crossing and I was beginning to walk into the street to stop the traffic. And then I realized he was there and he's like, Anna, I've got to tell you something. I'm like, hang on a minute. I just got across these people, and but I'm late for work. And I'm like, I've got to, just because there was kids on, okay, just wait a minute. I've just got to stop the traffic. And I finished and I turned, I'm like, yeah. And he goes, I'm changing jobs, I'm moving. I'm like, oh, is that a good thing? Is that good for you? Is that what you want? And he said, yeah, it's good. I've got a promotion. I'm moving down to Providence, Rhode Island. And I was like, oh, then I'm really happy for you. I'm really happy for you. And he gave me this big hug, and then he went off. And I remember having a little cry, went home, had a little cry, because I thought, oh, I don't want to lose him, this lovely person in my life. But, you know, I went on. I'd like to say I was fine. I wasn't immediately, but eventually I got a lot better. I'm cool. I'm here today. I'm not suffering anymore, thankfully. And but that young man, I'd love to somehow find him someday. And I know that a couple of you, I mentioned to you, live down in Providence, Rhode Island. So please look out for CB. And I am going to try and be more like CB. I'm going to try and put rays of sun into random people's hearts, because you never know quite how they're feeling. And I would ask you all to be more like CB. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that story. I can't wait to go out into the world again and think about how to be like CB. So that is our show. That's our show. Thank you for tuning in tonight. Special thanks to all of our tellers, Allison, Teresa, Brendan, and Anna. Wow. I think another round of applause. Thank you so much. I just have a couple more words for us before we go. Janelle mentioned at the beginning that there's so much stuff going on at ātac. Go to the website. There's a newsletter that you can sign up for to see everything that's going on at the Amazing Things Art Center. And we're going to put that, slide up in just a moment. I hope you enjoyed our show and that your experience was a good one, uplifting. And if you want to tell me about it, I want to hear from you. There's an email account that's set up, utterhope@gmail.com. That will also be on the slide in just a sec that you can see. And I want you to save the date and tell your friends. August 14th, we're going to do this again. We don't have the details worked out yet, but we will have them worked out soon, and we'll be able to post that information on social media, both the ātac social media accounts and Utter Hope's lonely little Facebook page. I don't have all the social media accounts set up for Utter Hope, just one. So thank you again to the audience, to Janelle, to Dave, to all the tellers, and again to the Metro West Regional Coalition for Suicide Prevention, who is supporting this collaboration between Janelle and I. Thanks, everyone.